Well, it's great to see you.
Nice to see you too. Besides, I don't want to hear them do it. I can tell you. I'll probably go by work.
One more thing we finished.
All right, great.
Allocation.
Did you want to come back up or you come back down?
Because I have to leave early, I'm going to stay here so it's not disruptive.
Okay.
But I will take it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. We have today Judson Cornfleck and Paul Hume from GWWO. Again, we want to thank you for funding this study. It has brought us a lot of information. It is a roadmap for us. It's not a finalization. We have to work with it for future CIP at the county level and the state level. And you'll be seeing some of that when we present you our CIP this year, as a direct effort from their study.
Thank
So
you, Mr. Hedl.
I'm just going to turn it over to
Well, would you just introduce yourself in your position?
Keith Hedl, Assistant Superintendent of Supporting Services.
Thank you. And you pointed out about the county funding, and for the benefit of our listeners, it was actually funded from the Developer Rights and Responsibilities Agreement Fund, which is an indication of exactly what we're talking about, having funds available for appropriate uses. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen?
Thank you. My name is Paul Hume, and I'm a principal with GWWO Architects in Judson is with me. As you might imagine, the creation of the CIP is a complicated process that involves a number of variables, including visiting existing facilities and taking all those different variables into consideration. While Judson and I are two individuals sitting here, there's a whole team behind us of many other individuals who helped put this together, including engineers from Kybart Associates who are MEPs, our civil engineers, MK Design, and cost estimating people. We work closely with the folks at facilities to make sure that we were doing things in keeping with what we think is an appropriate manner. The results of the CIP are critical also in the sense that you can have a fantastic CIP, but it has to be clear. You have to convey easily what the results of those are. And we think we've succeeded in that respect based on some of the feedback we've gotten back recently from Dr. Lieber at the state. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Judson, who's going to walk you through the process of how we came to the conclusions that we did. Judson.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for letting us speak here today. And this will be very similar to the presentation we gave to the board. I believe Commissioners Robinson and Collins were present for that. So we'll go ahead and get started. The CIP itself, we worked closely with Charles County, with Mr. Hedl, with the former director, supervisor of the construction, Jerry Barrett, as well as Mr. Clements and Mr. Steve Andritz, throughout this process to try and determine what the best strategy was for developing a comprehensive and clear, as Paul was mentioning, CIP and capital improvement plan. The Charles County mission statement states that they want to provide Charles County Public Schools facilities with full 21st century instructional capability, and we couldn't agree more. And much of what we provided in our report was tailored towards how the existing facilities met goals of 21st century educational goals. Now just getting into the nuts and bolts of the phasing, working with Charles County, we needed to establish a clear vision, a clear plan, and a set of metrics by which we were going to operate so that it was a really clear and objective system for creating this CIP. Starting with phase one, which was establishing this vision, collecting preliminary data such as capacities, such as the ages of the schools, acreages that the schools were on, things that were very objective that could be given to us to begin developing our database. It also had to do with establishing these objectives and visions as far as what we were looking for in each school, and what I covered in the previous slide about comparing it to a 21st century educational ideal. Phase two, which is really the bulk of our study, had to do with actually getting to know the school. Each school in the county, taking on-site assessments ourselves, along with Kybart. We went down to analyze the condition of the school from, a physical standpoint, an operations standpoint as far as how the systems were working within the school, as well as those kind of functional things that had to do with perhaps adjacencies of, a gymnasium to classrooms, or how the daylighting or the acoustics were working within the schools. There were a lot of factors while visiting the schools that we were able to document and really make, and well-advised decisions about. In phase 3, this is what we're partaking in now. It's putting it forward to the community, and it's getting, stakeholder input on what our findings are. It's getting ready to present it to the state to actually apply for funding. So I mentioned before the data that we've been collecting, and it's important to note the distinction between that quantitative and qualitative data. There's the quantitative things such as capacity, such as square footages, things that we can easily take and put into a scoring system. But there are other things such as I had mentioned, adjacencies between spaces. You don't want to have a gym and a cafeteria that are located inboard and that can't be expanded upon at a future date. You don't want classrooms that are facing the interior of the school without access to daylight. There's a lot of factors that are harder to put into a numerical context that we were trying to really underscore the importance of in our report. And so by taking those quantitative and qualitative factors together, we developed a scoring criteria. They had to do with an architectural score, a site score, an MEP score, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing score. And these were all undertaken by ourselves as well as our consultants. And those scores were also buttressed by a survey score. And these surveys were given to building service managers as well as principals for each and every school within the county. And they were given questions, very much along the lines of what we would ask while visiting the school, how the acoustics were performing in the school, whether science labs had the adequate equipment necessary. Questions that their insider knowledge could really help us in honing in our report. And so by combining those, you can see in the middle here that we weighted each score according to the importance to the report, and that makes up 80% of the total score. So when you look at the physical building itself, 80% of the ranking comes from that. The other 20% comes from building capacity. Now, projecting to the year 2022, we're able to forecast where some schools will be lacking or have deficiencies as far as capacity goes, because that's having a permanent seat for each student. Ourselves as well as Charles County's agreed is of the utmost importance for the students. We understand that at this point, the facilities have been kept up to a modicum, a standard at this point, and really it's understanding that looking into the future, making sure that students have a seat is really an important factor. So that factored in 20% to the overall score, and to the point where each score was given between 1 and 5. We developed a scoring system for each school, and with these basic slots where we can decide what the overall recommendation for a school would be. And as you'll see, looking down in the later slides here, it wasn't merely this larger explanation. We really got down into itemizing each and every improvement that we saw necessary at each school. So as I had mentioned before, when describing phase 2 of the on-site assessments, this is an example of a form that we might bring to each school. Equipped with a database system, we were able to take copious notes as far as the spatial qualities of the cafeteria, the classrooms, the gym, all of the major spaces within the school, taking photographic documentation of what was going on, and very specific things that we saw that would be important in noting in the final report. And this is just a zoomed in view of what we might do. Take a condition of a certain system, whether it be floors, ceilings, walls. We really try to make as robust of a system as possible to try and make these scores really bring through the true essence of what was necessary at each school. This is an example of what our consulting engineers would work through, taking note of the types of equipment, what the capacity was, when it was manufactured, and also giving condition scores. So it wasn't necessarily just saying, oh, the air conditioning system gets a score of a 3. It was really documenting each and every part of that system, all the way down to the pumps and ducts, and trying to understand, where there were areas that could be improved, where areas were, functioning well. And then here's just another example of taking some of that qualitative data, taking notes and understanding. We know that it's not just coming down to a line item for each system, just giving it a single score. We understand that each school kind of tells a story and has aged differently from the other ones. And this is an example of one of the questions we might submit to one of the principals and building service managers in our surveys that we provided. And really this was great because going into the school, we weren't walking in blind. We were able to analyze what they had told us as far as what the strengths and weaknesses of each individual school was. So going into the building, there were very specific areas that we could search out and note within our report. And so going back to capacity, understanding that the physical condition of the building makes up a large percentage of what our recommendation was, but understanding how capacity could bring other schools, their need could be prioritized accordingly. And we used a kind of cluster analysis where, geographically speaking, we took convenient clusters of schools and analyzed together their capacities. So we would take elementary schools, for instance, and compare their state-rated capacity to what the projected enrollment would be, and then come up with a percentage looking forward to 2022. This allowed us to really easily hone in on those areas within the county which we thought added capacity was absolutely necessary. This is an example of the GIS program that we used to analyze this data spatially. It was very important for us to, not only get the numbers, but also be able to spatially understand where these schools were clustered and what kind of relationships there were between them. And this is, the fruits of our labor. This is one of the charts that we were able to produce by doing this capacity analysis, understanding that if there were no action taken as far as adding seats or adding seats to any of the schools, or not, doing any of the recommendations, this is the schools in the red here. Each one of these bars, by the way, represents a school, an elementary school within the county. You see as you move towards year 2022, and this is a projection, let me remind you, but the amount of schools over 120% capacity starts to really grow, whereas by looking at our recommendations, that kind of system is really, it's really evaded the way that we are able to bring schools down towards that maximum 100% capacity. And so by looking at capacity, looking at building score, this is an example of one of the charts that we would come up with. If you recall back to the scoring criteria sheet, we had those four metrics of architecture, MEP, site, and survey, and combined they give us that building score, which represents 80% of what our prioritization is. And then we have the FTE or capacity score, which offsets that 20%, giving us a project order for each school. And now you can understand that certain schools such as Stephen or Recleta, there's, while their scores may be the lowest, their need for capacity are not as high, and thus, necessarily other schools that maybe have a more dire need of additional capacity move closer to the top of the list. Continuing that scoring matrix, these schools that are further down the list, their building scores kind of reflect that. They're a little bit, they're in better condition, and they don't need as immediate attention as some of the previous schools did. And I'll remind you of this further on in the presentation, but it's important to note that while they have, you know, currently their scores are in the good to very good range, we found it important to create a systematized maintenance program and try to rate them accordingly. Because while this system is a 10-year capital improvement plan that won't, you know, take effect for a number of years, so some of these schools that we don't see as having such a dire need at this point, when we're projecting it 10 years into the future, it's hard to recommend giving no school any work for an entire 10-year period. So here's an example of one of the individual recommendation sheets that we provided. This makes up the bulk of the report, and each and every school is analyzed according to a number of factors. Just to get into the specifics of it, the map that I had shown before, this is an example of taking that school in particular and showing it in relation to other schools as far as capacity is concerned. So looking at where there are areas of need around it, where there are areas where capacity is much more in line with the enrollment. You can just kind of see that spatially. On the top left is the project order, which we had mentioned before is the order within the 10-year CIP where we think the project should fall. Below here, this is just a brief paragraph summarizing the conditions of the school, where there are areas that are, you know, operating successfully, where there are areas that need some attention. And then the building facts we felt were a really clear way for the public to understand very specific issues within the school, whether it be, you know, relocatables on site, whether there's been a recent addition, whether there's poor daylighting or something of that effect. We felt that was a really easy and clear way to understand what those areas, what the areas of the school were. And here, up at the top of this page, you'll note a line item description of each and every improvement that we feel would be warranted at each school. And I mentioned that in our previous flow chart, we'd seen, you know, a score less than 2 is due for a replacement, between 2 and 3 is a replacement or a major renovation, and those are kind of guidelines. At this point, we really get into a dollar figure to try and understand how much work is needed at the school and whether it's actually appropriate to replace the school or to provide the necessary renovations. And at the top right here, the building score, which we described earlier, which places the school within that 1 to 5 range as far as objectively just the physical conditions of the school without being weighted by capacity. And this maintenance priority, I had also mentioned previously, of those schools that had a better building score, it was just making sure that they were being addressed, even in a minor fashion, some of the smaller maintenance items that might come up over the 10-year period. At the bottom here, it's just a graphic understanding of where the school may fit in within the overall project determination. You can see here at 2.88, it's closer to that renovation maintenance range, meaning that its priorities is a little bit lower than other schools. And then the recommendations just gives a more robust description of what we recommend the prescribed work for each school. And now, determining these recommendations, that was really only one step of the process. Understanding where the funding sources came from was also very important for us. Trying to understand, if you'll see back here, that we have a county share and a state share associated with every line item of the project. And understanding that, you know, where state funding aligns with county funding and where the county would be responsible for 100% was very important to us to be able to give, you know, the most detailed and accurate cost estimate possible for each of these projects. As well, it was important for us to understand where there was overlap between projects. For instance, if we had recommended exterior windows and doors for each school, we thought it might be advantageous to look at those totals as one single line item. For instance, if the school decided to go through a program of roof replacements or exterior window replacements, perhaps that would make the most fiscal sense as far as, you know, looking at schools in bulk rather than doing an individual school renovation followed by another individual school. And that leads us to the 10-year priority list. Each and every school is given a spot within the list. And it's important to note that this is for planning purposes only, for delivering to the state for funding. It's not that these schools would actually begin construction in 2016. It's important to realize that it's, you know, the beginning of the planning process where these schools are listed. And it wasn't, it wouldn't give us a very clear or detailed picture to get into the minutia of trying to project school costs over the life of the project, because we understand that state funding is staged over a number of years during construction. And so each school was, you know, very simply given an overall construction budget, and that budget was applied to a single year, just for clarity's sake. So moving into 2016, we can see a number of elementary schools being repurposed, and then a new elementary school being constructed, as well as that maintenance, that modified maintenance budget that I mentioned. The idea that these schools that maybe aren't very high up on the list are being addressed, you know, within the first 5 years. As we continue, you see La Plata, and you start to see more elementary schools. And it was important to find the required capacity, so those projects, you know, necessarily move towards the top of the list, and they are buttressed by other renovation projects. And these projects are also grouped not only by, you know, the priority that we talked about, but by phasing needs. So you can understand that because Turner and Brown are very close geographically speaking, we felt it advantageous to try and associate those projects with each other when developing the plan, the correct phasing for the plan. So moving through each year, we get towards the end, and the schools that are in fair condition, but we project, you know, starting to become in need of minor renovations or additions, start to come up here. And just a more detailed focus on these maintenance projects. Right now, the county usually denotes about $4.5 million a year for systemic replacements, regular maintenance. And so we basically broke that out, and for each school applied, you know, we grouped the schools together and applied, you know, this basic grouping of $4.5 million for those schools for maintenance here. And then this brings us to the totals. We have a new construction budget as well as that maintenance budget that I've been referring to, coming to close to $600 million. And as I said, this is something that's, you know, not meant to be completed within the 10-year period, but meant to be addressed within that period. So we'd like to thank, obviously, Dr. Hill and the rest of the board, as well as Mr. Heddle and Office of Supporting Services, as well as the Planning and Construction Department and the Maintenance Department, because really throughout this process, all of them helped us, giving us information when we needed it, trying to give us the most, you know, clear picture of each school and how the county, you know, operated on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I'd like to thank you and turn it over to Tom.
Any questions, Commissioner Robinson?
Well, I've seen this twice now, and you didn't mention who funded the study, and the commissioners funded the study.
Mr. Heddle mentioned it.
I know, but I want to point out that we spent a significant amount on this study, and you did an absolutely outstanding job, not only with the depth, but also being able to explain it in language that anybody can understand. I don't think anybody sees the more than $500 million price tag as something realistic that we can achieve in 10 years. However, I think it truly is a guide for where we need to be moving. And there's nothing worse than deferring maintenance. If we have a lot of schools that have had deferred maintenance and we need to do some catching up. We've just opened out our 7th high school, St. Charles High School, which is probably one of the gems in the nation in terms of education. But the gems of education shouldn't be limited to just those students who are fortunate enough to be attending that high school, and we need to have some equality. But thank you very much for the work that you and your team and the work that the school system contributed to this.
Commissioner, anything else you'd like to add? This is great work. you know, again, I say the task force recommendations, although they were intended initially to deal with strictly new construction, certainly will open some doors and get people thinking about other possibilities and how we can handle some of these price tags. And I too want to say, this is really well done. You know, I mean, it makes sense, it's easy to read, it gives us a guide, and I think this is something, and I want to commend the Board of Ed for recommending that we take this action, because this is what the missing link was. Throughout our discussions on the school allocation task force, you know, so often we knew that we had issues, we knew that we were creating great high schools and great, you know, new construction, but that we had to deal and make sure that we had equity in education. So I really appreciate this. I think it's going to be a great tool for the boards going forward, and gives us. And I really like the way you broke it out so that you can really see, you know, where to go first and where we can wait a little. I also was real impressed with, in fact, I was sort of surprised at how many locations you said, you know, just start over, build a new school on that site. You know, because that is one of the issues we've dealt with, school sites. So that whole idea of just leaving what you have there, you mentioned repurposing buildings, and then going back and seeing, you know, renovation or, you know, new school would be best. So really thought that was very helpful. It was information that, you know, we've always thought in this county in the context of build a new school, build a new school, build a new school. And you not only encouraged us to think more about renovating what we have, but just set, you know, right there on that spot, building a new school rather than, you know, trying to renovate at a greater expense. And then your illustration where you showed how we could meet our capacity needs. You know, I think when people hear, yes, it's a big price tag, but it also is going to improve capacity and reduce overcrowding. That was a big plus for me. So,
Commissioner Kelly, if I could.
yes, Superintendent Hill.
First of all, I wanted to thank you all again for providing the funding for this study, because as you stated, GWWO provided us expert outside view of really kind of things that we knew, but we didn't know. And so we thank you all for your professionalism and for the work that you've done with Mr. Heddle and his staff, and thank you all for funding this. I think it's important for you all to know and for our public to know that all of our school buildings are safe and they are well maintained. But they're also, many of them are old, and we really do have some work to do. So what we're hoping is that now that we have this information, you know, Judson talked about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Now we're in the phase of, so what? What do we do with this information? And what we have planned is a series of public forums. And we would love for you all to join us at those forums. The first one is Monday night, the 22nd, at Benjamin Stoddard Middle School at 6 p.m. We want to hear the public's input on this. When you talk about repurposing a school, you know, that has meaning when it comes to the physical site, but it also has meaning when it comes to the community there and the people who live there. And so we want to gain that community input, and we want you to hear that with us.
That's excellent.
And we want to move forward, because you talk about the $600 million price tag. It's going to take very strong, very committed, and very collaborative leadership on the part of your board and our board to help our community understand what this money is being invested in. And as Commissioner Rucci stated, alternative ways of gathering that money.
The revenue stream piece, yes.
Exactly. So we look forward to 3 community forums, and we hope you'll be with us at all of those, September 22nd, September 29th, and October 13th. Details about that are on the CCBOE website.
That's great. And we'll make sure, you know, our staff get the word out on that. That's wonderful to include the community. You know, we talk about repurposing buildings. You know, immediately I think about, we always hear that we need community centers. We need places where kids can go and play basketball and do all the fun crafts and things. So, but at any rate, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But you know, there's so many needs. But there's no question, this is really perfect timing. And so, commissioners, anything else you'd like to add? Again, thank you very much. And again, I say to all of the staff in the room, you know, this is the real number crunching and all this work. We know it takes a lot of time and a lot of professionalism, and I sincerely appreciate it. And Mr. Belton and Superintendent Hill, thank you for everything you've done to help us understand these complicated issues. And boy, Ms. Peterson, we sure are gonna miss you, and Ms. Cook, and Ms. Abel. We're glad you'll still be around for a bit, so.
Lucas is trying
Mr.
to-
Lucas.
Oh, and Mr. Lucas, okay, yes, sort of stuck in there on us. Thank you for being here, Mr. Lucas, we're glad to have you. So with that, is there anything else anybody would like to discuss? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Robinson, is there a second? Second by Commissioner Collins, all in favor? Opposed, and motion carries.